Well, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. I've got all this stuff I got to carry, so maybe that'll keep me from using my hands more than I normally do. But thanks for coming to this session. I'm sure you're here for lots of different reasons. I wanted to do this session because I am a zealot about this topic, particularly for women, but any of the men in here, you will find it useful as well because the tips are very similar, but there is research specific to women, in particular. So I'm sure there's lots of reasons why you're here. I'm pretty informal, so please feel free as we're going through to ask any kind of questions. You should have a handout, and I'll just tell you what's actually in there if you hadn't seen already. I wanted you to be able to take something away with you, so I have the slides in there, but I have a couple of things, just some articles that I've written when I've been writing. I do have a handout called the 30 Deadly Salary Mistakes. That came from a great resource, Kranick and Kranick. You may read that and say, okay, I've done a lot of those things. And so I always tell people, just let that go, that's in your past, and now you start with today. Because we've all made lots of mistakes in negotiations, and you just have to start at this moment and move forward, and not worry about the past, and just say, what can I do at this point in time, right? And then I'll come back to what that prep sheet's all about. Okay, so my goal, let me go back, is that I'm really big on let's take the research that we know about and then let's try to give people real practical tips, what you can actually use every single day. Now I do have some of my own staff and employees in here, so let me just tell you, you do not need to use any of these tips on me, because number one, I know what they are, and number two, I'm fighting to get you as much money as I can every day. So, perhaps that shouldn't have been taped. Okay, but I want you to get some practical tips. I also just point out is that very few people actually negotiate, despite the fact that most recruiters, do we have any recruiters in here? Okay, so it'd be interesting to hear your perspective throughout, because I work with both students and executives. I've done a lot of executive coaching, and then on the other side with, given my background with HR people, so I play both sides in some regards. But a lot of times recruiters expect people to negotiate, but very few people actually do negotiate. So we kind of want to talk about why. So the first thing I just want you to think about is, just for yourself, how would you just rate yourself in terms of, just take a minute to kind of reflect on that, and do you consider yourself good at negotiating, and maybe just think about where would you put yourself on a 1 to 5 scale of, I strongly agree I'm really good at negotiating. And the second question about, I'm usually satisfied with the results of my efforts to negotiate salary. Just kind of think about those questions. And if we had a lot more time, 45 minutes is not much time to make sure that I get questions from you, and normally I would spend a half a day on this topic, so this is really going to be compressed. I'm trying to give you the real high points. But I want you to think, because normally we'd spend some time just thinking about, what do you think about negotiation in general? Because there's usually, when I've taught negotiation, there's usually people that are in there that hate it and say it's worse than being at the dentist. I don't know why poor dentists get the bad rap, but it's really bad. I hate doing it. And then there's other people who are like, I love it. It's a game, and I just want to keep getting better. I mean, it's usually this kind of interesting distribution of people. But so how many of you gave yourself a 4 or 5 on being good at it? Okay. One lone person.
Jeez, really?
Maybe 2. Okay. So yeah, most people don't. You're probably better than you think, but most people do not think they're particularly good at it. Bless you. And then anybody give themselves 4 or 5 on how satisfied they were with the results? Okay, so some of you, but probably not too much, because most of you said you didn't negotiate. And then I would imagine that many of you have negotiated for your salary. In some situations, it's tough because of the kind of company you go with, and do they have, I always say that every situation, you should be able to at least look at it. Even if it's a government kind of job or some job where there's, some sort of standards, there's probably something that you can still look at. My recruiter here is agreeing, I think. And so, you have to think about, there may have been, so anybody at least negotiated for a salary at some point in their life, or a raise? Okay. And if you haven't, don't feel bad about that. That's why you're here, right? Of what is it that I need to do. But I think the reason I want you to start thinking about is because you can't improve in anything unless you know how you are right now. And where do you need to be? I am a big proponent, those of you who were in the last session, I'm a big proponent about self-awareness. What am I good at? What am I not so good at? If you have a chance, take a negotiations class. Like, this is going to be very abbreviated, but if you can take one, because a class, you learn things, you practice, and then you get feedback. Sometimes you're videotaped. I mean, so we would do this over like a whole semester, or some people I've worked with for 6 months, whatever. So negotiations is a skill. It's learned. You can learn these things, and then you can improve. That's why I'm really passionate about it, because every person that I know that I work with, you can see them at this point, and then you can see them in terms of change over time. But it is a skill, and it also means you have to keep practicing, right? And so it's not something you just learn once and then that's the end of it. You got to keep practicing. Okay, so this is a women's session, so I'm just going to share the women's research, and it's very clear. And in the back of that handout, I have resources if you want to read more about this. It's extremely clear. 3 primary things that happen about salary negotiations. Number 1, women don't ask. So you can't get things if you don't ask, okay? Because unless our recruiter in here is different, most recruiters don't just start giving you stuff. I've worked with a lot of recruiters who say, well, if they ask me, but if they don't ask me, I'm not going to be just giving them a bunch of stuff. So most women do not ask for themselves. But there is research that says women are really good at negotiating for other people. Their staff, their kids. Like, I got to set up my parent-teacher conferences. Like, so I'll be in there fighting, right, for whatever it is I might need to fight for that time, like many of you. And so women are generally great at negotiating for other people, not so much for themselves. And that's part of sort of training. And so there's a lot of things. So look at all those. That's not just in the job market. That's even at home. Could you do these chores? Could you help me here? Could you do, those kinds of things as well. Second big finding is this in people's way? Let me move this out of the way. That women, not only do they not ask, but when they do ask, they just don't ask for as much as men do. And there's a lot of research on the fact that if you ask, a man will typically say, I'm worth this, and a woman will say, well, whatever other people are getting, that's fine. And so they don't ask for as much. Okay, so that's an important phenomenon. And then the third big point is women aren't as persistent when they do ask. So what we mean by that is you ask and someone says no, and you're like, okay, as opposed to asking a second time. So I want you to think about what are the key takeaways you're going to get out of the session, and that's one of them, is I have a strong, this is going to be one of my books down the road, is it's going to be called Push Back Twice. It's this theory that even if you just ask that second time, it makes a difference, right? And so persistence is very important. And think about that every time you ask for things, your tendency is to ask one time, somebody says, no, I don't think so, and you're like, oh, okay, and then you back up. But if you ask that second time, and you're a little persistent, more than likely you're going to get something. So we'll come back to that. So remember these 3 things. That's what all this is based on. Tons and tons of research about this, okay? So now, this is the depressing part of the session, right? The research. Because in some situations, people do take a tougher stance on women. And so look at the issue. So this is just about car sales. But the reason they do is because they're pretty sure women are not going to ask for things. And they're pretty sure that they're going to just give up. And so they take very tough stances against women for those reasons. And there's a strong expectation, and this is based on a lot of research, that women will accept less and they'll just give away things. So what do people do? They set higher targets against women. They make tougher first offers. So I'm going to offer you, I've run into situations where people have said, could you take over the salary discussions because this other person offered people significantly less than what they were currently making. So why would they come and take that job? Doesn't even make sense. But it's in that theory of, well, let's just offer them something and maybe they'll come. And so people take tough stances. They set, maybe either low first offers. They press women harder to make concessions on things. The fact that they also think that whereas men will push harder and then they won't give up stuff, women will just give up a little bit faster. So there's all this interesting research. So I just want you to be aware of this. If you want any easy situations, just go to a car sale situation, right? And that's actually a great training ground. If you have 4 hours to kill, which people in here do, I don't know. But they are very skilled, and nothing against car sales because I worked at a dealership once, but not selling, but they really know a lot of negotiation tactics, and they use most of them. And so, but if you just watch some of the tactics, and I will say that when you know what the tactics are, it reduces the impact they have on you. So if you know, just a quick example, if you know that people are playing good cop, bad cop, you know, because we do this as parents too, right? Who's going to be the good cop? Who's going to be the bad cop? When you see that, you're like, okay, I know what game they're playing, and I don't have to say anything about it, but I know what's happening, and so it reduces the impact on you. So that's going to be important. Okay. Now, why should you negotiate? So this is why I'm a zealot. I want every person in here to do this when you leave, is because it has a tremendous impact on your future. Not only in terms of if you look at comparisons between men and women in terms of salaries down the road, and the differences in how much you will make, but remember, everything is based on your base salary. So those percentage increases that you get, your retirement, you know, all those kind of benefits, they're all percentage of your base. And so if you don't negotiate for that base salary, that's what I really encourage people to think about, then all those other factors take a role too. It's also really, remember, a lot of this is just psychological. So when people look at two people and they say, oh, this person was making $60,000 before and this person was making $80,000, that person that was making $80,000 must be really a better employee, right? It could have been that the person who made $60,000 just did never negotiate, but people make the assumption that if you've made more money, then you're worth more. In their minds, and you're a better performer. They equate all kinds of other things. And that's probably not the case, but this is what happens for people, right? So people will assume if your compensation record is better, then you must be a better person, and it just impacts so many things. So, okay, but you guys must know this, or why else would you be here? So I'm just gonna give you 10 tips. Hopefully I'll get through all of them, but I could give you 20 tips, but I only have 45 minutes. So. My top 10 tips. The first one is just, you have to first recognize that something is a negotiation opportunity. And I think that almost everything you walk into is a negotiation opportunity. Whether it's going into a committee meeting, whether it's having a conversation with somebody. And so you just have to think this is a potential negotiation. Now, why is that important? It's because a lot of times we walk into things and we don't think those are negotiations. So just tell me, what are the most common negotiations that people think about? Like opportunities where you would negotiate?
Between family members, trying to get decisions.
No, that's pretty tricky. Negotiations between family members. Those are probably the most difficult ones you got to deal with, right? I'm one of 5, I'm in the middle, which probably explains a lot about why I do what I do, right? I mean, I've had to mediate my whole life. So yeah, that's pretty good. What else? Yeah, buying a house. I mean, we all expect in the U.S. we're going to be negotiating for buying a house. Most of us expect we're probably going to negotiate for buying a car, although people don't like to do this, and hence you have places like CarMax, right? But I have known people negotiate at CarMax, so just saying. So there's like a few things. Anybody planning a wedding? Everything in the wedding is negotiable. I used to teach a lot of MBA students, and they'd all be like at that age of getting married, and I'd be like, everything, from the DJ to the church to the whatever it is you're doing. It's all negotiable. So I guess the point is just you have to recognize that there's a lot of opportunity out there, and think about it every time you're in experience. Is this a negotiation opportunity, right? Because if you don't see it as one, you're not going to do anything. Does that make sense? And just negotiating. But the problem is, unless you practice, you may not come across really effectively, and then you're like, oh my God, that was a bad experience. So I'll give you a good example. I had a gal who was practicing in a jewelry shop, and so she said, well, she must have asked them about, could they come down and praise with the jewelry, and they're like, we never do that, and they were really offended. And she was like, oh my gosh, it was just all this negative. Now, remember, you should expect that that could happen, right? Just like in a car dealership, you should expect they're going to write a number down and slide it across the table. I mean, it's all part of the game. So when you know it's going to happen, you're like, okay, they're going to put it down on paper and they're going to slide. So she got really flustered by, wow, like I'm like this awful person because I tried to ask for something. And so you just have to remember that, you have to practice so you're prepared for that. And then you're prepared for what do I do next in that situation. Right. So that's the first, probably one of the most critical things you have to do. Yeah, sure.
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
on that first one?
Yep.
Just, is it appropriate or would it be weird to first ask if something is negotiable, like salary negotiation primarily? Is it appropriate to first say, like say you're getting a new job offer and they give you a number, and is it appropriate to first say before you start throwing back your own number, is this negotiable?
Yeah, I actually don't like to do that. And women are more inclined to do that than men. Men just assume it is for the most part. So, because you're already setting up that it's easy for them to say, no, it's not negotiable. Okay? I think you want to go into some context as if it is. You can certainly say, I'm assuming that you're going to put that in writing, and then we'll have a chance to sort of talk about the offer. That's a nice way. Also, just, we're going to talk about style, but I think it's perfectly fine to have a nice style. We don't want to turn anybody into these overly aggressive people that you hate that are out there negotiating, right? Because everybody has to find their own style. But yeah, I like that a little bit better, because when you say, is it negotiable, chances are you're going to get a no. And let me just point out that if you ask that by email, it's like the death knell, right? Because email is your worst form of negotiation. Do not do anything by, if you really care about it. That it's just too easy for people not to respond, or, Okay, so probably the most important thing you can do is prepare. And as women, I'd say that's a strength of really preparing. So preparing is critical. Now, what is it you need to prepare? So one of the things I prepared for you was a little prep sheet. Now, this is based on what we call the 7 elements of negotiation. So you'll see all these different points, and there's more than 7 here, but it includes the 7 key elements of what are your interests, what are the options, what criteria we use. We'll talk about the BATNAs, some of those things. But even if you spent 5 minutes writing down some of those things, that'd be better than doing nothing. But the preparation is the most important thing. Why? Why is it? Why is preparation so important in negotiation? Sure.
I think then you're more credible and you're more likely to know what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to take. And so you're not caught off guard in the moment.
Sure. Yeah, and any other thoughts?
You also sound confident.
Yep.
You come in and you sound confident and you know what you're doing.
Yep.
And you don't sound like you're going to back down, and you don't talk about negotiable. And they say this and you say no, and then they come back at you, and they say, well, okay, we're going to wait, then I have to go and talk to so-and-so. Okay, you do that. And if you comment them straight ahead, it's different than if you're, I've been on both sides.
Yeah, it's a great point. One of the reasons people don't negotiate is they don't feel confident about it. So if you think about it when you're going to give an important presentation, most of us prepare, right? So a negotiation is the same thing. And that's why I say look for opportunities, because even in going into a meeting, would you go into a meeting cold? Generally, it doesn't turn out too well for you. So preparation is really important, because preparation builds confidence, which is directly related to your negotiation success. And once again, when you're more confident, you're going to be more inclined to push for things. If you go into that mattress store and you're like, I don't know, is that a good price? Is that not a good price? Then you just do whatever you think, because you're like, I have no way of knowing. So, but if you did your research, like who today would go buy a car without doing the research? It would make no logical sense. Because there's so much you could do in terms of research to be prepared before you walk in there. So it's really important, but what is it you need to prepare? You have to do salary research on the position. And generally there's a lot of data out there. So I know I have a lot of websites posted in some of these slides, but also just looking at the company. How are they doing? So during the economic downturn, like 2008, et cetera, there were a lot of firms who would say, oh, we're doing really bad, so don't even think about it, negotiating. But one of the things I counseled a lot of people that were looking for jobs at that point was do your research, because sometimes those specific firms were doing quite well. And so if you could go in there and say, well, it's great to see that your firm's doing really well in this sector, you almost deal with that problem right away. You're proactive about, they can't really say, oh no, we're losing money. But a lot of companies used that, right? So find out how they're doing, their financial position. If you can get any insider information, which a lot of times you can, then you have to figure out your market value. And one of the things I always tell people is, so today, at this moment, if you had to write down your market value, what would you write down? Because every day you should know your market value. And you'd say, so let's say you write something down, and then, but you should write down a range, by the way. And then I would say, how confident are you? So those of you who are confident, that's great. Those of you who aren't, what does that mean? It means you need to go do research. What am I really worth in the market? Okay, and where do I get that? I look at places like, careerbuilder.com, glassdoor.com. I mean, there's a lot, payscale.com, there's a lot of websites, salary.com, that can help you understand what are you worth, right? That's really important. Figure out what your needs are. BATNA, we'll talk about that. That stands for your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, if you don't get that job, what will you do? If you don't get that raise, what will you do? You must think about that. If you go into a committee meeting and you don't get your way, what will you do? You always, every situation, if you don't buy that, house, what will you do? You always think about what's my alternative and how good is it? If it's really good, you're going to be pretty confident to negotiate because you'll be like, I got this great alternative. If it's not very good, you're going to probably cave. So what your goal is to have alternatives and come up with the best possible. That's why for those of you in the market, you want to have multiple job offers in a short period of time so you can make comparisons, right? So that you can see what's my best alternative. Yes?
Question.
Sure.
Oftentimes I find that HR will try to get your range before you can even consider making you an offer. Do you tell them?
No. That's a great question. So the question is, do you reveal that question comes up so much, right? So on job applications, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. What's your name? Letitia. It's interesting because, so you fill out an application and they ask you what salary you want or what salary you made, right? All those questions. Now you do this online or you can't continue on in the application process, et cetera. I personally do not like to answer those questions. I encourage people not to answer those questions because your best time for negotiating for salary for a job is after they've made an offer. Because remember, after they've made a verbal offer and said, I want you, then they want you. All the time before that, they don't know if they want you yet. You don't even know if you want to be there yet, right? So, and you don't have leverage. So you want to wait until after they make you an offer. And it could be after they made you a written offer. I know a lot of people are like, how do you do that? You got the written offer. That's a starting point, okay? Now, remember, there are some firms that say they don't negotiate, but I still encourage you to ask questions of, to better understand the nature of the offer. But this is a really good one. And so you may have, maybe difficult for you, and what do? You can write in negotiable. You can leave it blank. You can, if you're a good qualified person, they're not going to they're going to say, oh, you forgot to fill something in. And you can talk about, yeah, I'd like to come back to that after we get a little further in the process. Can you tell me more about the nature of the job that I'd be doing, et cetera. Or you can, I've had people write in zeros. They know you don't want to work for nothing, right? Yes.
That's what I was going to ask. Some of the software you have to put a numerical
Yeah.
value in there. And so I was going to ask about putting zeros or
I've had people do that and it's been fine.
yeah.
You have thoughts, Letitia?
Yeah, I would agree. I think what I've seen sometimes when people do put a number, sometimes that will also determine whether or not we want to, if you're looking for more than one position at our company, so I work in education, so it's a little bit different. But if you put in that you want to make $130,000, I assume you want to be an administrator and not like a grade level chair or something else. So automatically, I'll have folks that will say, I don't even want to consider them for other positions, even if that's not what you're looking for at this time, because the salary range is higher. So I wouldn't, personally, I would just leave it at a 0.
Now, okay, you're hearing that from her.
But don't tell anybody.
You're on tape now, but whatever. Yes.
What about when you're negotiating within your own company and they have your, I mean, I've worked for the same company
Yeah.
for 10 years. They have my employment history and what I'm making. And then I also feel like it's awkward with people that you've known and worked with for many years because it's almost like you get offered a promotion and then it makes it stickier.
So the raise issue or a different job in the same firm is much trickier, right? And there's actually not a lot written on that, but I think that once again it's about preparation, and also looking at your market value. So I still think that most people that go in and ask for a raise, when you ask them what's your alternative, they say, I don't know. And so you're like, so you're going to ask for this raise and you don't know what your alternative. What is your alternative? It really should be, what's the market willing to pay you, right? And but that's tricky because in some fields you don't want that getting out there, right? So there's a lot of things that go in that. But I think it just goes back to preparation of really knowing what are you worth. And then also, let's say you went back to school, you got your MBA from this great school here, and now you're worth something totally different. And so even though they're still thinking about you as that one person who had that job, so you have to be able to share market data with them of what are you worth now with an MBA? And so you have to have done that kind of research. Yes?
So I'm going to go back to putting the zeros in. So,
Yeah.
so often now when you have that initial screen, so it's talking to someone, they say, what are you looking to make or what have you made? And it's very difficult to dance around that question. I have tried to say before, you know what, I'm so much more interested in the opportunity, let's talk about that later after we get to know each other. 9 times out of 10 it comes back to me, we really need to know what you're looking to make because we need to know if we're in the same ballpark or not, because if we're not, we might as well just stop talking. So
Yeah, so the research generally shows that people will ask you 3 times. If you can hold out 3 times, you're probably good. But most people can't, they cave. And once again, that takes practice. I think the 30 deadly salary mistakes, where it has the reference of Kranick and Kranick, they actually go through some specific examples of how to respond to that that you could consider. It's a great resource. But I think it's, as my family tells me, I'm the master of deflection. And deflection is very important in this case. Nice deflection, right? I know we're going to be able to talk about that. I think that's really important. But I'm so excited about the group of people that I'm going to be working with. Can you talk to me about them? That's the first one, right? And then they're going to give you that hard sell of, no, we have to have it because we got to put it in our files. I mean, it's always some reason, right? And so I think that you can still, the problem is we're not comfortable with deflecting, or we're not, you have to practice this of being able to say, no, I will address that, but I still want to learn more about the nature of the position. Remember, you don't have much leverage until you get the offer. So answering that question early on is not in your best interest unless you have very specific salary requirements and you want to make sure I get to this number. And if they can't do it, then I'm not even entertaining them. Then go ahead. But generally, it's not in the applicant's best interest. Because if you raise a number that's too high, they won't make you the offer. And maybe you would have still worked there. If you raise it and it's too low, you're going to have to backpedal later to get up there. But you're right, it's a really tough thing. You have to practice it, and you have to work on the whole deflection thing. Let me move on because I know there's a...
Could you just repeat the resource that you just
Yeah.
gave that had that listing now?
So if you look at... So I think in the back of my slides I have
I just
all of
wondered
the
which resource it
references.
was.
But the one I was talking about was... Kranick and Kranick Dynamite Salary Negotiations. And they give specific examples of the phrasing you can use. You're going to have to wordsmith it yourself, but they'll come up with things like, your figure is not within our budget. You really haven't shown that you deserve this much money. I mean, and then how do you respond to those kinds of things? But I think what's really important is you need to know your market value. You need to stay focused on it, and you need to practice with somebody difficult, so that you can practice, how do I respond to these questions? And just know, if I can stay firm at least 3 times, they'll probably drop it, right? Okay, so I think I kind of talked about the salary worth. the importance of sort of, now those of you who are trying to get raises, once again, there's got to be reasons. Like, you can't just say because I want one. I mean, it's got to be, what have you done? And I always think about it in terms of what have you done in terms of people and money, so that you've had increasing responsibilities or that you've been responsible for money. These are really important things. How have you helped them make money? How have you helped them solve problems? But I think every person in here has to keep a file on yourself. Because if you don't, like, who's going to? There is no supervisor who has the time to keep a file on you of all the great things you're doing. So you need to, as you go through things, even if you just put in a little sticky note for yourself and then periodically summarize those. I have some people that I work with here who are phenomenal at that. And, but it's great because, once again, that's like documentation, and every manager, they don't know all the great things that you're doing. Yes?
So as far as negotiating for a higher pay, do you look at the time work? So if I've only been somewhere for a year, but I have documented all the things I've done within this year, do you think a year is long enough for you to ask for?
So the question is year long enough to ask for a raise? I don't think time is the issue. Yeah, I think it's a great question because it could be 6 months, but you've really mastered a number of things. And then you also have company policies, right? Of, do they have this discussion after a year? Do they have it after 6 months? Do they have it on your anniversary? I mean, whatever it is, sometimes that plays a role in there. So I'm not so sure it's all about, because you could have the conversation in 6 months and then come back to it at the year time when they say, okay, that's when we make those kind of decisions. So it's not a bad thing to have that conversation early, though, right? So use the right style. The only thing I want to say here is that you guys have heard this. Women do have a tendency to be very apologetic. I'm sorry I'm asking. Don't really mean to. You just cannot do that, right? Just in general, but certainly not in salary negotiations. And it's not that you have to be really gruff, because people don't expect you to be. People expect women to be nice and to be sociable. And I personally think you can be. We talk about being, hard on the problem and soft on the person. You can be very nice to the person, but tough about the issue. Remember when the car salesperson slides it across? There's a deliberate reason they're doing that. It's because the problem is on paper in between us. It's not us. And so it's actually a clever strategy, because it's like, here's the issue. Wow, that's one we have to figure out. But you and I are good friends. And that's actually a good strategy. So just like if you're having a conversation with a boss, it's better not to be across from them, to be kind of like near them, because you're working as a team to try to figure something out. And a raise is a great one for that, of trying to figure it out. We are working to solve this problem together. So women are expected to use this social style. So I think that's pretty important. Okay, and there's a lot about listening. Listening is, remember, you can get a lot of things without necessarily talking. If you're really extroverted, I would encourage you to listen more. And you, because we talk about, and I'll give you this next part about silence. Silence is one of the most powerful negotiation tools that you can use. So in almost every situation of maybe asking a question and then saying nothing for effect, right? Or making a point and then saying nothing. The problem is we have the tendency to overtalk things. So here's a great example. Let's say you want to get a raise. So you go in and you give them the 15 reasons why you want a raise. So what have they heard? One reason. It's a big one, but one. But if you give them one reason and let them digest it, and then later on give them a second reason because you've used silence strategically, when you do things like that, it comes across as multiple things. Does this make sense? So silence is extremely powerful in negotiations. So I don't like the view that our best negotiators are those slick sales kind of people talking, because they may not necessarily be. I've seen some of the best negotiators just be quiet and just really take things in. Remember, the more you ask questions, the more you learn. So those of you who are more introverted, you kind of have an advantage here, because you can learn a lot. Because extroverts have a tendency to reveal a lot of stuff. Why do I need to sell the house? Oh yeah, my grandparents died and I have to get rid of it. I mean, they tell you all kinds of things. So you as a more introvert person, can learn a lot that can serve as leverage for you. Does that make sense? So that's just stylistic things. So that's men, women, whatever. And so I talked about this a little bit about the importance of, especially in a raise negotiation, it's about a relationship, right? You're going to stay there. Or if you're going to be in another part of the firm, you're going to stay there. So the relationship is important, but let's not get confused about if we ask for things, it doesn't mean we're harming the relationship. And that's where women in particular get into a lot of trouble because they think, well, now I'm not being nice. Okay, it has nothing to do with niceness. And that's why when we talk to women a lot, they over-identify with the other party. And they feel guilt for, well, I shouldn't have to ask them, to like take out the trash. Or I shouldn't have to ask, my kid to do the homework. Or I shouldn't have to ask for, and so then you start feeling bad. So I guess I would just say to you, let the other person take care of themselves. They're adults. And so if you go in there and you go into a retail establishment and you got 200% off on something, take the deal, right? Because they're still making money on you, or they wouldn't do it, or they're just really bad. So don't start feeling bad. And I've had people do that. They're like, I felt so bad, I just gave them stuff back. And I was like, oh, you just got all that stuff, So remember, it's because we over-identify and feel guilt. You shouldn't feel guilt. Other people can take care of themselves. Does that make sense? This is why women are great at negotiating for other people, but not so much for themselves, right? Okay, so I talked about the BATNA a little bit. This is really, how am I doing on time? 5 minutes? Okay. Wow, time goes by fast. So I said preparation is probably one of the most important things. The BATNA is probably your next. You've got to think about your alternative in every situation. What is it? Get somebody to ask you what your alternative is. And then the reason it's called a BATNA is you need to make it as attractive as possible. This goes back to my point of why do you want multiple job offers at one point in time, right? Why do you want to look at multiple cars at one point in time? Why do you want to do multiple of anything? Because you want an alternative. And the alternative enables you to feel confident to push for something. But if your alternative is awful, and so here's a good example, even if you have just one offer, what's your alternative? You could keep looking. Some people will say, oh my gosh, that's awful, I just want to be done this. And then other people will be like, that's good, I'm okay with that because I like to keep looking, it doesn't bother me. So how you perceive your alternative is a big factor. So you want to have alternatives, but you want to rate your alternatives, and that's why on my prep sheet I say, think about how you rate your alternatives, how attractive are they, because if they're not very attractive to you, you need to keep looking for one. And then I also want you to think about what is their alternative. If they don't hire you, what will they do? They will have to keep looking. If you did some research and you found out that they gave 5 offers to Villanova people and 4 of them turned it down, that's not good for them. So they're probably going to do more for you just to try to get you, right? So you want to know, and you can ask questions, about those kinds of things. Does this make sense? Okay. So a couple other quick points. Like I said, I probably won't get through all these. But this one's a big one. I think we have a tendency to set pretty low targets for ourselves, and we need to set higher targets. We call them an MPP, your maximum plausible position. So if you're looking for a job, and maybe 100,000 is maximum plausible, but 200,000 is just unrealistic, right? So you don't go in there asking for something really extreme. Why? Because generally people get ticked off when you make an extreme offer. And you might get more, but you might just totally blow the deal, totally. So, but how would you even know what's an MPP? The research. What did you do to prepare to see what's realistic? That's how you know about how much you spend for your car. You did the research, right? You know what's plausible. Yes. So the whole thing about this is that you should think about what's maximum plausible. And then my point about this is, this point on the right, you have to think about, let's say I think maximum plausible is, 80,000 for this job. And then I know I could live on 60 though. If I go into the negotiation and I'm thinking I just need to get close to 60, That's very different than if I go in thinking I need 80, right? So if they come in and they say, we're going to offer you 65. Well, if you're thinking, oh, I could just live with 60, you're like, oh my God, that's awesome. But if you go in there thinking, I really wanted the 80, then 65 sounds pretty bad. And so that will make you fight a little harder for things. So my point about this is think about what the maximum plausible is, and that should be in your head, not your bottom line number. Does this make sense? Okay, that's really important. And catch yourself on it, because most of us go in thinking of our bottom line, not what we really want, our aspiration. Okay, I talked a little bit about self-confidence. That comes from practice. And I guess I will say I want to make sure we have some other time for questions. So practicing is really important. Practice. I would also say your toughest negotiations you should do face-to-face, unless you're just really bad face-to-face. Yeah, then you need practice, right? But you're more inclined to get things face-to-face, followed by phone, followed by email. Email's the worst, as I said. But a negotiation for a salary a lot of times happens over the phone, because you've already established a relationship, you've already done something, and then that's kind of the final parts. So practice over the phone. Get feedback from people on how do you come across over the phone. That's really important, because there are people that have really strong phone voices, and there are other people who are like trailing or you mumbling. So that's kind of important to do. Okay, let me stop here and see what kind of other questions we have. Yes?
So, I actually came from an interview today,
Uh-oh.
and it's internal,
Okay.
and it's definitely more work, and it's an hour from my house. But they called me and asked me to interview, and I came in there with a number, but they showed me their offer, and I was thinking 10% is my minimum, because the first 5 is eating up travel costs alone, not including hours in the car. And they only came in at 5, and I was like, what?
So is this a final? Is this like a final offer?
No,
Or is this the first? This is the
I
first
asked him-
interview.
I said, is this a hard number? And he goes, I'm not sure, I'd have to ask about it. Which was kind of where we left it off, because I was a little taken back by, that was not what I was expecting. The other
So by
problem-
the way, to that point, then what you want to do is, if the person says, let me go check, then just let them go check. We have the tendency to just say, no, don't worry about it or whatever. Let them go check, because it's in your best interest to have them go and fight the battle for you. And you can say, is there anything else that I can give you that could help you as you're going to check? But go ahead.
So my concern is, I've passed up other things, because my husband also has a job, so we're trying not to move too often. And if you pass up too many things at my place of work, they stop asking you
okay.
to do things, and it starts becoming more of a fight to get places. So should I consider that? Like, should I take? I wouldn't take 5%. I don't even think it covers almost 6 covers.
But this
my
is
travel.
internal with the company,
Yes.
but just a different location.
Yes.
Okay.
And my concern is if I keep turning things down, I put myself in a.
How many times have you turned things down?
This would be my 3rd if I turn.
In how many years?
4.
So I think you should still do whatever research you need to be able to go back and, say that I'm assuming this was an offer, that you appreciate the offer, but this is what, I guess I would be a little less worried about turning something down. I think if you can share some data about, these are some real issues in terms of that extra drive. You're saying it's going to be another hour?
Right, so I drive 15
Yeah.
minutes now. It'll take me 55 to get there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a work-life issue, right?
Right.
So I think, though, you need some research as to what's it worth, like in terms of doing this, right? Why else should they be giving you? And frankly, when you make an internal move, it really shouldn't be comparable in terms of salary. Because why would you bother? Why would anybody bother making any kind of move? But a lot of times employers will do that, even if it's an external move. They think about that. Well, let's just give them 5% more. I think you need to say that's, you were expecting something more. And by the way, you can say, I'm just going to need you to do better than that. You do not have to come back. That's a really good point. You do not have to come back and counter with a specific number. In fact, it's in your best interest if you don't. Because if you can say you're going to need to do better than that, sometimes they will come back with something better than you thought. Now, if they're clever, they'll say, well, how much better? And so then you'll have to say, well, significantly better, or something else that's vague, right? You could play that dance for a little bit, but it's okay to do that. But yeah, I would certainly ask questions about that, because that doesn't sound like it's in your best interest. And I would be less worried if they really want you for this job. I hear what your concern is about not taking certain things, but this is a quality of life thing, so I would ask questions about that. Yes?
So how would your approach change? Like my background's, sustainability, social entrepreneurship, advancement, that sort of thing. And I had some health problems that took me out of the job market. So very few things that are posted really match my skill sets, even though I had a lot of great experience before. So a lot of what I've seen is like whether someone has a problem or not, like you see a problem or opportunity that a university or a nonprofit or somebody, they don't appreciate it. So if you're going to pitch them on creating a role or creating, an organization within the organization, how do you approach that from a salary point of view?
Well, that's tricky also, like for people going from government jobs to private sector jobs or going from the military to civilian jobs. I mean, there's a lot of those transition kinds of things. And I think once again, whatever you can try to do to show how you transition into those roles, and a lot of times people, get sort of coaching or something to help them figure out what does the market look like for them? What's the set of skills that you have that are transferable, right? Regardless of what you did before or why you were out of the market, you still want to look at market research to figure out, like salary.com, I think they still do this, they had this thing where you could pay this additional fee, wasn't that much, where you could put in all your characteristics, et cetera, and it would sort of tell you what you're worth. And I actually had some people that did that it really helped them in the market about being able to sort of justify their position. But I think in your case, you have to be able to say, here's all the skill pieces that I bring as it relates to this set of, whatever that job qualifications are. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Yes.
What's your perspective on after you negotiate the base salary, continuing to negotiate benefits or vacation time if they do kind of meet you where you want to be in terms of the salary?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. What do you do if you, well, that's great first if you get all the base stuff you want. And I do try to encourage people to go for cash because that's the hardest thing and that influences everything. People that can come up with a list of 20 things, and I've coached some people that have done that, and they were able to get away with it, was because they were in such high demand based on their experience, et cetera, that they could say, here's my list. And they also didn't care because they loved where they were, right? But very few people are in that situation. So think about the top 3 things. You can have the conversation about base, and then you can say, and here's another thing that I wanted to bring up. I would be very careful, though, I'm glad you brought this up. Focus on the thing that's most important to you first. I mean, I encourage people to think about the base, but maybe that's not the most important. But I would focus on that first. Because in that first conversation, they may say, well, no, we can't do that, but we have a great benefits package. I mean, you always hear that. And that's really not, it is worth something, or who knows today. But I think that you want to say, well, wait a minute, I still want to focus on this, whatever that first thing is. And get that as close to where you want as possible before you bring up that second thing. Don't allow them to do all those trade-offs in the first conversation. But yeah, I think you can do that. I just think you don't want to have a list of like 10 things and then nickel and dime people. And I wanted another $500 for whatever. When you're talking about salaries that are whatever, 50,000 or more, I mean, that's just kind of nickel and diming people, and it does come across bad. Yes, last question.
I have a related question about, and it's on your next slide, you just didn't get to it. So
Yep.
It says, don't put everything on the table at once. Is
Yes.
what you're just talking about, right?
Yep.
So even if you pick your top 3,
Yep.
I think it's, in my experience, it's been really hard to, negotiate that salary. Okay, you go back and forth. Yeah, we'll go to the well, and then, oh, let me bring up another thing now, and then I'll bring up another thing. Like they don't want to have to go back to the well several different times. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit about.
I actually think they expect you to do it. It also, once again, goes back to what kind of position are you in. The higher the level of the position, the more they expect you to negotiate. And in fact, I've actually known some people that for executive level positions where they told them if you hadn't negotiated for things, we were going to rescind the offer because you should be expected to negotiate. If you're looking for a consulting job, that's part of your job is to negotiate. So if you don't negotiate in the job offer, now remember, it doesn't mean you're fighting for every dime. It could mean you're just asking a set of questions about things. I want people, you're not going to get everything you want, but I want people to understand what you got and why you got it or why you didn't. I mean, I can say that for me personally. I haven't gotten always all the things I want, but I understand the decisions. Most of us leave a conversation wondering what just happened there and why did we get it or not get it. And so I don't want you to be in that situation. So maybe you're asked questions, you don't get all those things, but at least you asked it, and you also set the stage for the future. But I do think it's okay to go back the second time and say, I really appreciate, generally they don't give you everything you want on the base anyway. So you can say, I appreciate what you were able to do here. I also wanted to bring up, when I can have that review or the vacation time or, whatever the other issue is that you want to bring up. And if they typically haven't given you everything, then you have a little bit of leverage there because they didn't do everything that you kind of wanted.
So are you suggesting then negotiate that base salary, get it as good as you're gonna get it, and then come
Yes,
back with,
I
great,
am.
thanks for doing that, here are the
Yes.
other things that I wanna address?
Yes, I am. Because if you try to put all three things in the first conversation, they will go to the non-monetary things or the least expensive things. And base is the toughest thing because, that's a line, right? In terms of, so for them, it'd be better for them to just give you a bonus because that's a one-time kind of thing, or, more relocation, something like that. But once again, everybody's different. So you have to think about, because for a lot of people, vacation, time off is really important to them. So maybe they work on that issue. But that's a tricky one too, because it's hard to say, thanks for the job, now how much time off can I have? I mean, it just doesn't come across really well, Okay, so I know I'm out of time. I'm way beyond. So I have some other information there. These things we actually talked about before, about the kinds of things you can do. I would just say, I talked about being persistent, and I do think it's really important that you're willing to walk. You're only willing to walk away. In every negotiation, being willing to walk is very important. It gives you leverage. You're only willing to walk if you have good alternatives. If you don't have a good alternative, you're not willing to walk, right? So I will stick around in case there's other, because it's what, 4:05 or whatever it is? Okay. And I think your next session is at 4:30, is that right? One other thing, though, I wanted to give you is, so I need you guys to pull out your wallets, because this is about money, right? So come on, pull them out. Wallet. We like to take donations. No, I'm just kidding. So pull out your wallets. Okay, so since this was such a short session, we went so fast, I made you a little card with my top 10 tips on it. Put that in your wallet. All right, just pass those down. So now you're in the middle of a negotiation. You could say, I just need a couple minutes to go to the restroom and check out. Unfortunately, you need glasses to see this. So, but take this with you, and hopefully that will help you. I appreciate you all coming. I'll stick around if you have additional questions. And if you have any other questions, please just feel free. My email address is on there too. Just email me with any questions, and I'd love to help you in any way I can.